The bleachers and stage barriers trembled beneath the force of thousands of fans chanting an idol's name. Every mouth moved with hers, every gesture was polished, and the 6 performers flowed together with practiced precision. She was an idol, and the enormous stage belonged to her. Not far away, Reina hummed along while applying her own makeup. Her group, Lumen 9, was part of the same festival lineup. Even so, she knew the crowd at the main stage would not move to the smaller platform where her band was scheduled to perform. Reina was an idol too, but Lumen 9 had never found the same success. She and her bandmates had trained for years and toured Hinamori for 7 of them, chasing the dream of stardom. In a market overflowing with competition, however, their success had remained modest. Idol superstardom depended on audience taste, media exposure, budgets, production value, industry relationships, artistic quality, physical endurance, and a measure of pure luck. Whenever Reina, Lumen 9, or their label secured one part of that equation, another always seemed to be missing. Years of vocal training had made Reina the lead singer of the 9-member group, but at 24 she tore the meniscus in her left knee. Lumen 9 began gaining traction with radio stations, only for their producer to be exposed as a sexual harasser. Then, a long-awaited international tour was cancelled when a global pandemic shut the world down. One setback after another slowly wore away at her resolve. As Reina warmed her voice, she did so knowing that only a few loyal fans and casually curious festival-goers would visit their side stage. By then, disappointment had become part of the routine. She slid a discreet brace over her injured knee and tried to accept what her career had become. The joint no longer moved as it once had, yet it was still part of her, and she had spent years learning to live with its limits. No amount of physical therapy had erased the injury. Choreography remained difficult, and the lingering pain often disrupted her breathing enough to make her vocals unstable. Even so, Reina continued. She remained devoted to her craft and held on to the faint hope that success might still come. More than fame, she wanted to feel proud of herself again. Still, years of struggle had planted disappointment deep within her. Money was always scarce. Even with 2 roommates, she barely survived each month. She had dropped out of school to pursue her idol dream, a youthful decision she now regretted every day. Her reading ability had never advanced far beyond middle school level. In an already strained economy, few opportunities existed beyond service work and hostess cafes for someone attractive and entertaining, but undereducated and without formal skills. She knew nothing about spreadsheets or presentations, had never been good at mathematics or grammar, and possessed no technical trade. What she did have was music. She could play almost any instrument she touched, harmonize with nearly anyone, dance with confidence, and guide an audience like a conductor of joy. Music was her only true skill, and it seemed like her only path. Yet even music appeared to be betraying her, offering failure and pain in place of the future she had imagined. Worse, Lumen 9's failure did not belong to Reina alone. Her bandmates had sacrificed just as much. As their leader, Reina felt responsible for protecting them, yet she could not shield them from one setback after another. The label granted them no creative freedom. Every request to contribute lyrics or choreography was denied, and every original song submission was discarded without serious consideration. Then came the revenue cuts. The label shifted its attention toward newer acts and reduced Lumen 9 to small regional tours. Outside Kiora, their remaining schedule reached only nearby markets such as Mizuhara, Seikawa, and Natsuhama. Natsuhama was where Reina's first life ended, and where her true story began. Years of reduced budgets, weakened safety training, a shortage of skilled stage-rigging workers, and record heat converged on a single disastrous day. A ruthless July sun hung over the humid festival grounds. The heat had already driven away much of the expected audience. When Reina and her bandmates peeked from the changing room, they saw perhaps 50 middle-aged men waiting before the side stage. Most of Lumen 9's remaining fans were older men. Reina did not dislike or judge them. She simply found it strange that so many looked old enough to be her father. With weary humor, she had once remarked that at least they were interested in women in their 20s rather than little girls. Then she looked across the thinning hair of their ever-thinning crowd. When it was time for Lumen 9 to take the stage, it was over 100 degrees. The few dozen fans who remained waved their handheld fans while the technicians prepared the lights and backing tracks. Microphones came online, lasers were programmed, and the mixing decks were adjusted. Reina approached the label attendant standing in the shade with a portable fan. Concerned for the group, Reina asked whether they truly had to perform the entire set without an intermission. Their costumes were thick, and the heat was becoming dangerous. He sighed, a familiar, indignant exhale. He called her a dumb brat and ordered the group to stop complaining and finish the performance. Reina knew it was unavoidable. With that, Lumen 9 took the stage. In the bright, high-pitched voice expected of her public persona, Reina greeted the audience with exaggerated cheer, perfectly hiding the melancholy rooted inside her. She bowed, thanked everyone for coming, and discreetly signaled the technician to adjust her audio feedback. Digitally, cute songs began. Reina's verse was first. As the bandmates twirled and bounced on the balls of their feet, she moved to the center of the stage. Reina began the first verse. Woke up with the sun in my hair. Clouds are dancing, I don't have a care. Lace up dreams on my feet, let's go. Every little step is a glittering glow. As she sang, her controlled smile stayed in place through every word. Each line was delivered with a believable joy and charisma that would convince almost any viewer that Reina was happy. The chorus began and all the girls sang in unison. The rest of Lumen 9 joined her for the chorus. It's a bright new day. Come and shine with me. Hearts wide open, wild and free. We'll paint the sky with sugar and light. Hold my hand and we'll take flight. La la love, let's sing and play. It's a bright new day. Their heavy costumes trapped the heat, and the choreography drained what little strength they had left. By the fifth song, Reina and her bandmates were soaked in sweat and close to collapsing. The stagehands were struggling too. Several of them looked ready to pass out. The crowd had thinned to fewer than 20 people. Between songs, Reina closed her eyes and poured water over her neck. Rent was due the next day, and she was already calculating how little she could spend on groceries amid shortages and rising prices. She tried to hide her gasping breaths while deciding which expense could be delayed. Weakness spread through her body, and the thought of sacrificing her youth for a chance that might never come brought tears to her eyes. They were tears of exhaustion and defeat. This was not the life she had imagined. Memories of indifferent producers, rejected creative ideas, her parents' condemning expressions, and audiences who scarcely cared about Lumen 9 crowded into her mind until she could no longer contain them. For the first time, Reina wanted to quit. This might have been the end. This might have been as far as she could go. At least, that's what she thought. Nearby, a young stagehand was losing a day-long battle with dehydration and a hangover. He had skipped food after an all-night drinking session and spent hours beneath the brutal sun. No one noticed how often he drifted in and out of consciousness until his body finally gave way. Reina was pressing an ice towel to a bandmate's neck when she briefly turned from the audience to wipe her eyes. At that exact moment, the stagehand collapsed into the scaffolding. Poorly secured brackets and loose screws tore free, and the overhead lighting rig snapped from its mount. By the time Reina understood the commotion, it was already too late. She looked up and saw the 3-ton lighting system falling toward her. Metal crashed, people screamed, and before anyone could reach the stage, Reina was gone. A final tear traced her cheek as her life on Astrea ended. Then something impossible happened. Death should have been the end of Reina's story. Instead, it carried her somewhere impossible. A soundless ringing pulsed inside Reina's mind when consciousness returned. She could sense the ringing without hearing any pitch. An empty vibration more disturbing than ordinary noise. As her thoughts slowly reassembled, pain spread through every part of her body. The memory of the falling rig flashed before her, and Reina jolted upright. With a terrified scream, she was no longer on the stage in Natsuhama. Instead, she had awakened inside a damp, fog-filled chamber where thin currents of purple light flowed through fissures in translucent black stone. The walls and floor had been carved with deliberate precision, but dust and neglect revealed that the craftsmanship belonged to a forgotten age. The air was cold and stale. Every attempt to focus sharpened the agony in her head, while broken images of the falling scaffolding flickered through her thoughts like damaged film. Reina drew her arms against her chest and fought. To understand where she was, she called out softly, then more desperately, begging anyone nearby to help her. Only silence answered. Forcing her eyes fully open sent another wave of pain through her skull. Darkness drifted in and out of focus while purple currents pulsed through the stone. Nearby, murky white and blue liquid flowed along a narrow crevice without making a sound, even where the uneven rock churned it into foam. The old injury in her left knee burned with renewed violence. When she tried to bend it, pain drove her forward onto the cold stone. Her strained gasps returned as muted echoes, and she slowly realized the problem was not her hearing. Sound itself seemed weakened in this place. She called for help again, but the chamber remained empty. Her strength gave out, and she fell back to the floor. Images of the falling rig and the instant before impact flickered through her mind like damaged frames of film. Consciousness came and went for what might have been days. The pain never eased. Hunger tightened around her body, made worse by the rigid corset still squeezing her ribs. With trembling hands, Reina tore at the costume until the threads gave way, and the corset fell beside her. She drew shallow breaths into bruised lungs. Her throat was raw, and dehydration was pulling her toward shock. Instinct warned her not to drink from the murky stream. Whatever this place was, she had to move. Repeating that she had to keep moving, Reina forced her trembling legs beneath her and reached for a stone ledge. The ledge gave her enough support to rise. The moment her hand touched the stone, the nearest purple current brightened and began pulsing down the corridor. With no other guide and no strength to waste, Reina followed its glow on her hands and knees. As her vision steadied, she saw that the glowing fissures lined what had once been a magnificent hall. A vaulted ceiling rose several stories overhead. After nearly an hour of crawling, she reached the end of the corridor and stared through a wide opening. An immense ancient hall opened before her, abandoned in appearance yet still in use. Banners and glowing lights hung from ruined columns, while clean storage crates lined the walls. Pink dust floated through the cold blue air, and purple fissures shone beneath the translucent black stone. Strange devices and machines filled the hall. Some resembled instruments she knew, while others had no recognizable purpose. A few could fit in one hand, others were as large as buildings. Reina left the wall and crawled toward a raised circular platform framed by columns carved with floral patterns. Awe and confusion briefly cut through her exhaustion, only to collapse into despair when she found no clean water anywhere in the hall. She sank to the floor and sobbed until exhaustion overwhelmed her. With her eyes closed, she never saw the glowing fissures redirect their pulses toward the place where she lay. Was she dying again? Was she already dead? Where was she, and why had any of this happened? Nothing about it felt right. The falling rig replayed endlessly in her mind as hunger and dehydration pulled her into hallucinations. She was back in the meeting rooms, being rejected by producers and having her song notes thrown in her face. She was back in the exam room, being told her flexibility would never fully return. She was late on rent, and her landlord was banging on her door. Through every memory, she was alone. Alone, except for music. Through blurred vision, the unfamiliar instruments reminded her that music had always remained beside her. It had not brought the career she dreamed of or the connection she longed for, but it had still been her one reliable source of comfort. Beneath every rejection and failure, music had never truly left her. With nothing left but the need for comfort, Reina began to sing. Her weakened voice drifted through the silent hall. Tears slipped from her unfocused eyes, and consciousness faded in and out. But Reina kept singing. It was not a song from Lumen 9. It was a song she wrote that she'd never been able to perform for a single soul. I watched all my dreams burn out. I never found peace, but I found a way. Then I hit rock bottom, and the bottom dropped out. Her voice was fragile but clear. With her eyes closed, she never saw the purple fissures brighten around her. Broken down and broke. All those words we never spoke. Faint, Angelic harmonies answered her, and the surrounding instruments seemed almost to lean toward her collapsed body, working 2 jobs every weekend. My legs gave out, but I never gave in. All around her, tiny silver and pink flecks of incandescent light rose from the ground and drifted around her in a weightless dance. Sunsets turned to flames that turned to fear. The hopes almost faded out. Long-forgotten torches flared to life along the walls, and distant chimes pulsed through the chamber. Reina's voice trembled as she wept, unaware of the hurried footsteps approaching from the corridor. The hopes almost faded out, but they never faded away. I never found peace, but I found a way. She was dying again, and this time it felt final. In the end, nothing remained except for me, and I'm still here. Her voice disappeared. Darkness closed around her as 2 figures reached the platform. One was angular and shadowed, with softly glowing rose-colored eyes. The other was an enormous mass of moving stone. The last thing Reina felt was the larger being's hand closing around her waist and lifting her as though she weighed nothing. As consciousness slipped away, memories of childhood surfaced. Reina had entered a school talent show and failed even to place. Her family could not afford lessons, so she spent every evening singing along with city pop records and idol karaoke discs until she could match every pitch. In the present, unseen captors dragged her through a garish corridor. Years later, when an idol competition held auditions, Reina begged her parents to let her attend. They dismissed the dream as a waste of time and money, so she slipped away and traveled to Kiora alone. She reached the final round, but was cut. By the time she returned, her parents had reported her missing and forbade her from entering another competition. When the auditions returned the following year, she pleaded again and received the same refusal. She went anyway. This time, a scout invited her back for the next stage. When she returned home, her father struck her and disowned her. Her mother followed his decision, and before the night ended, Reina had nowhere to live. Cold stones scraped beneath her as bound arms were pulled forward and heavy footsteps moved beside her. For a week, she slept on trains and in shelters while waiting for the follow-up audition. When the day came, she gave the strongest performance of her life and was accepted into the training program. Tears ran down her unconscious face as her captors forced her into a rigid chair. The pain behind her eyes remained too severe to focus. When Reina weakly begged for water, the smaller figure answered with deceptive amusement. Her memories continued. Years of training had been documented through an online streaming show. Through relentless work, charm, and discipline, she survived the program and was shaped into Lumen 9's purple-haired, purple-clad lead vocalist. For a brief time, she believed she had finally succeeded. A torrent of ice-cold, stagnant water struck her face and dragged her back into the present. Reina coughed and looked up at her captors. One was a snake-like figure of living shadow whose rose-colored eyes remained fixed on her. Beside it stood a stone-covered giant twice her height, its long tusks gleaming in the purple light. Reina recoiled and demanded to know what they were and what was happening. The smaller captor hissed that they had been wondering the same thing, then seized her jaw and forced her mouth open. She kicked in panic as the creature poured a foul liquid from a vial down her throat. With a fanged smile, the creature explained, "That is not water, Shi-Solan. It is a truth serum. In a moment, you will be unable to hide even your darkest secrets." Then it leaned closer and asked, "How did you find the Echo Sanctum? No citizen is permitted to know of it, much less enter it." None of its questions made sense to Reina, who was still in as much shock as she had been ever since waking. In her strange nightmare, she insisted that she knew nothing, begged to go home, and could offer no explanation for how she had arrived. The large beast stepped forward and measured her with blank eyes. Without speaking, it grabbed her bad knee between 2 of its massive fingers and squeezed. Even the restrained pressure of its enormous grip felt capable of crushing her knee, and Reina screamed. Reina screamed for it to stop, while an unnatural warmth from the serum spread through her body. The smaller creature calmly announced that the drug was taking effect and began the interrogation. Reina could only whimper as her head fell forward. Its first question was whether she served the Ember Accord. Reina answered that she did not even know what the Ember Accord was. The creature looked genuinely surprised. It then asked which faction had sent her and what mission she had undertaken among the banished instruments. Reina closed her eyes and began to weep. It was all too much. She repeated that she belonged to no faction and only wanted to return home. When asked where home was, she answered, Kiora. The larger captor seemed confused, and the smaller one leaned forward. The smaller one said it had never heard of such a place and asked what she had done there. The serum stripped away her restraint. Reina confessed that she had been an idol and a singer, that an accident had killed her on stage, and that she had awakened here. Then she broke into repeated pleas that she had never wanted to die. The interrogators exchanged an uneasy glance before the smaller one asked, You were a Songbearer? Reina admitted it, then broke apart. Yes, but I do not want to sing anymore. Singing has only taken from me. Music has only hurt me. In that dark room, years of disappointment finally flowered into despair. Music seemed to have killed her and cast her into a world even crueler than the one she had lost. Her resistance collapsed, and she could do nothing but sob. The smaller captor glanced nervously toward the door. Before Reina could react, the stone giant lifted her from the chair, carried her through another corridor, and threw her into a cramped cell filled with cowering bodies. Fur and scales brushed against her as the lock sealed. A heavy impact shook the walls from somewhere beyond the prison. One prisoner whispered that the Ember Accord had arrived. Reina no longer cared. She collapsed against the stone and wept. The creatures murmured in astonishment at the sight of a Shisolan. One of them placed a large clawed hand gently on her back and promised she would be safe among them. Outside, the impacts grew stronger. Reina felt each one in her chest, even though the sound itself remained strangely muted. She kept her eyes closed and trembled through every vibration. This time she could not sing. Only her sobs rose between the distant blows. A silky voice quietly wondered why the Hushkeepers had placed her in the same cell as the others. When Reina finally opened her eyes, a menagerie of creatures, some charming, others terrifying, turned toward her. Closest to her was a round ball of fur with 4 eyes and a mouth filled with fangs. Reina recoiled and begged the fuzzy monster not to eat her. The creature laughed in confusion and asked why it would ever do such a thing. Several of the other prisoners joined its laughter. A large translucent bird asked how she had ended up there. Reina admitted that she did not understand. She thought she had died. When the bird asked what she meant, Reina explained that she had been crushed during a performance. She had awakened among impossible instruments, endured an interrogation, and then been thrown into a cell full of creatures. The prisoners fell silent. Dread and wonder moved through the cell before the fuzzy creature finally spoke. It asked whether Reina was truly a Songbearer. The question unsettled her because it was the second time someone in this world had used that title. She answered yes and forced herself upright. Then she explained that she had sung to herself in the instrument chamber because she believed she was dying. The translucent bird stared at her in disbelief and asked whether she had actually sung aloud while surrounded by the forbidden instruments. Reina wondered whether that had been a mistake. Every prisoner answered no at once. A tiny rodent with enormous ears called it a wonder beyond imagining, a songbearer singing in the presence of the lost sounds. The others repeated the word with reverence. None of this seemed right for Reina. She asked why her singing mattered so much. Her cellmates all stopped and looked at her in surprise. The rodent asked whether she was truly from another place. Reina admitted that she believed she was. The bird then explained that music had been forbidden for nearly a century. The hush had erased performance so that magic could never be used again. Before Reina could understand, the heavy footfalls of the stone giant approached from the corridor. Every prisoner stiffened. The rodent whispered that the Hushkeepers were coming. The fuzzy creature asked whether Reina had revealed that she was a Songbearer. She confessed that the truth serum had forced the answer from her. Fear moved through the cell. The bird whispered in despair. The fuzzy creature warned that the Hushkeepers would try to tear the song from Reina's soul. Reina could not understand what that meant. The rodent declared that they would protect her, even at the cost of their lives. Reina demanded to know why strangers would make such a sacrifice. None of them answered. Each footstep was bringing the beast closer. The translucent bird whispered, "For the Ember Accord." One after another, the others repeated, "For the Ember Accord." Reina begged them to stop, as every prisoner rose to face the door. The bird looked at Reina and said, "It is an honor to die knowing I met a Songbearer after all this time." The rodent gave her one final command. "Stay alive, dear Songbearer. We will delay him. Run down the hall, and do not stop." She pleaded with them not to do this, but the lock was already turning. As soon as the cell opened, the prisoners surged into the corridor and overwhelmed the stone giant with claws, teeth, and desperate force. The rodents screamed for Reina to run before the giant's fist struck it down. Shock hurled her through the doorway. Behind her, the giant tore through the defenders and pursued, while the last surviving prisoners threw themselves into its path. Screams of pain mixed with roars of frustration as Reina spun across a corner and continued down the hall away from the cell. The giant gained ground with every step. Pain stabbed through her knee. Each breath failed to fill her lungs, and at last Reina understood that this place was real. She called for help and nearly collapsed. Tremors under her feet told her that the beast was close. Outside, beyond the wall, the booms were stronger and more frequent. Everything seemed to be shaking. Vision began to blur. Nothing made sense in this place. The beast was on top of her now. A single swing of its clawed fist threw Reina across the hall and into the wall. She struck the wall and crumpled to the floor, pain tearing through her ribs. That didn't stop the beast. It stepped forward without hesitation and reached for her, but just as it neared her, there was a ground-splitting boom outside. The wall burst apart. Through the opening, Reina glimpsed a grey-blue sky crowded with unfamiliar airships, blue energy rising from the ground, and columns of brown smoke. Above the battlefield hung an immense mechanical city built across a vast platform supported by columns the size of skyscrapers. Reina didn't have time to fully process what she was seeing. Just as the beast let out a roar, something otherworldly landed in the opening. It was as large as the stone giant, but its body was made of metal. The machine had a humanoid frame, elongated reinforced arms, exposed gears, and a single glowing stone set into its chest. Seeing it caused the beast to roar once more, this time as though it was preparing for battle. The machine did not respond. It merely rushed forward with deafening steps and locked hands with the beast. Reina screamed as she crawled along the wall as the two massive beings threw one another to and fro. More stone walls tore away, and Reina took that as a chance to flee. Gathering all of her strength, she rushed forward from the destroyed hallway and into the battlefield. A voice behind her called, "Songbearer!" Reina turned to see the fuzzy mouth, bloodied and torn open, running after her. Reina rushed back and lifted it into her arms. The wounded creature managed a grin. "My name is Nimri, but I like Puff, despite everything." Reina answered, "I am Reina, but Songbearer works too." Beside them, the machine caught a glimpse of Reina helping the creature before the beast's punch snapped chunks of metal bracing from its headpiece. There was a hissing sound and a beam charged within the machine's hand as the blades on its knuckles began to glow. The beast stopped in fright, but it was too late. One sweeping strike ended the fight, cutting through the stone giant before it could attack again. Out on the battlefield, blue beams zipped past Reina and Puff as the two of them reached an outcropping of ruined columns. Explosions tore the ground apart near Reina's feet, and she screamed as thoughts of being torn to pieces from the impact raced through her mind. Puff crawled from her arms and pressed himself against the wall. Out of the field, Reina saw white, ashen beings in metal armor fighting with creatures of all sizes. A small fawn screamed nearby as its legs were pinned under a collapsed chunk of stone. Without thinking, Reina rushed out to help. Nimri shouted after her. She answered that she could not leave the trapped creature behind. Within a second, Puff was with her, and soon they were at the fawn's side. Silent blasts tore apart the ground around them. Reina fought to lift the stone, crying out in terror, but it was far too heavy. Then, the machine was there. Pressure valves opened and steam hissed from the giant's metallic shoulders. A deep voice from within ordered them aside and offered to help. Nimri recognized the voice and called the pilot Varric. Varric confirmed that he was there. Reina stepped back from the rubble and the Titan hoisted the stone away with ease. As the stone was lifted away, Reina grabbed the fawn and pulled it free. Once the fawn was safe, the machine dropped the stone and extended its hands. The fawn sprinted away in shock. Varric extended one metal hand and ordered Reina and Nimri to climb aboard, so he could take them away. With no safer choice, Reina climbed into the metal hand of the machine Varric was piloting. Varric carried them from the battlefield, away from the prison, the interrogation chamber, and the forbidden instruments. Reina watched the chaos recede through tears. Nothing in this realm resembled the world she had known. Rehearsals, recordings, and the disappointments of her old career now felt impossibly distant. She could only beg to awaken from what still seemed like a nightmare. But this was Vaeloria, and it had become her reality. Grey skies showed between the battlefield and the underside of the immense city above. Airships hovered in the gap, continuing to fire down upon the conflict. Muted explosions tore hardened earth from the wasteland as Varric carried Reina and Nimri across it. Nimri's matted fur brushed Reina's arm with every thunderous step. In her shock, she could barely remember the name he had just given her. She still did not understand whether the machine itself was alive or whether someone hidden inside controlled it. Instinct told her only to hold on. When another blast shattered the ground nearby, she covered her ears and screamed. She begged herself to wake. Puff's paw touched her arm to comfort her, but it was to no avail. He called up to Varric and asked why he had entered the battle. Varric answered that the Ember Accord had rushed into a trap despite his warnings. He believed most of them would be dead by sunset and had come only to rescue whoever he could. Hollow streaks cut through the air and struck the machine's armor. Reina curled into the smallest shape she could manage. Nimri warned that pursuers were closing in. Varric demanded to know why they were being followed. 3 of Puff's eyes glanced at Reina, while the last one looked up at the center of the machine in debate. Something settled in Puff's mind, and he spoke. Nimri finally shouted over the pursuing fire. "Varric, we need safety now. This Solon is a Songbearer." Varric reacted with disbelief. He insisted. "The Hushkeepers placed her in our cell, and every one of us sensed it. Take her to your tavern. Take her somewhere safe." The machine accelerated without another question. Its stride became a series of bounding leaps, and blue fire ignited across its back. Varric warned them to hold on. He called the machine Avera and activated burst mode. Every jump covered a soccer field's length before landing with a crushing thud that immediately pivoted into the next jump. Wind tore at Reina's skin until panic drove her close to unconsciousness. For one brief moment, she saw ruined towers rising around them beneath the silent weight of the city above. The archway of a tunnel overtook them, and soon the sky was cut out by the stone curves overhead. Varric warned that they were about to jump and told Reina to hold tightly to his hand. Nimri looked ahead and cried out to Alira. Reina couldn't bring herself to open her eyes, but she did feel more searing, burns of invisible attacks tracing ever closer to her face. Then Puff was there, crawling into her arms. He apologized and asked her to hold him because his small claws could not survive the fall. Reina glanced at him and understood. His tiny claws would not be able to hold on to anything during the free fall. Without hesitation, she scooped his body against her stomach and chest, then wrapped one arm over him, then the other around the metal finger of the great machine. Her legs locked around another finger, just as it closed ever so slightly to better shield them. With Nimri held against her chest, Reina called up, "Please keep your hand exactly like this." Varric promised, "Understood. I will not let you go." Now, Reina dared to look behind them at their pursuers. Though it was dark, she was able to see 2 small, hovering cylindrical devices closing in on them. She warned Varric that there were 2 pursuers. Varric thanked her, ordered them to hold on, and leapt into the darkness. The abyss swallowed every trace of light. Avera dropped into freefall, spinning between the walls, while Reina, Nimri, and even Varric cried out. The great machine's blue flames erupted once more, and Varric fought for balance. He urged Avera to straighten, while the thrusters roared. The pursuers followed them into the shaft. Their attacks struck closer and closer, while the thrusters burned so intensely that Avera's metal began to glow near Reina's leg. Panic nearly broke Reina's grip. Still, She clung to the machine. At last, the thrusters surged with enough force to steady the machine. Lights opened across Avera's chest and projected yellow beams along the walls. Varric shouted for them to brace, then reached out and struck a massive lever as they fell past it. Beneath them, there was a single opening. It began to close. Nimri screamed Varric's name. Varric insisted that they would make it even as the pursuing attacks tore through Avera's armor. The blue thrusters activated once again, slowing them even more. Now their pursuers were close. Below, the opening was half closed. Nimri cried out again. Varric ordered him to trust. All she could do was scream until the air abandoned her lungs and close her eyes so tight that she hoped they'd never open again. Avera slipped through the narrowing opening with only inches to spare. Its thrusters turned downward, blasting the water below into a storm of steam. The machine struck the flooded floor and sank nearly 2 meters as the gate sealed overhead. The two pursuers slammed into the closing barrier and exploded. Then, everything stopped. Steam filled the chamber while Avera trembled from strain. Reina remained wrapped around its hand, unable to release the one thing anchoring her to this world. Avera slowly lowered her single glowing lens toward Reina. Varric asked whether she was hurt. Puff lifted his head and finally looked around the darkened chamber where they had landed. He praised Varric's escape. Reina couldn't speak. Nimri touched her shoulder and called to her softly. Varric asked whether she was all right. Pressure valves opened across Avera's head and chest as the cockpit unlocked. Reina began to cry. It was soft at first, then it was a sob. She begged to wake and repeated that she did not want to remain in this place. Above her, the machine's chest cavity opened. A gloved hand covered in metal bracings and gears reached out to grab hold of the side for support. The hand had 3 large fingers and a thumb. It was trembling and seemed to be struggling. Nimri called Varric's name in concern. Reina still could not look up to see the figure appearing above her. The other hand appeared, also gloved and covered in a gauntlet. Varric pulled himself out of the cockpit and looked down at Reina. Her panic was so complete that she could not bring herself to look up at him. Her sobs became uncontrollable. She could not decide whether she had awakened in hell or become trapped in a nightmare that refused to end. Varric stopped his hand before touching her and said softly, "You are safe now. I will not allow any harm to befall you." The tunnels of the deep ways lay beneath the known world, where light was scarce, agents of the hush were rarer, and secrets disappeared into stone. They formed the hidden foundation of the Ember Accord and concealed Varric's tavern. As Avera carried her deeper into that darkness, Reina's consciousness faded. Hours of terror had left her mind and body in shock. Fatigue finally pulled her beneath awareness, and the last things she perceived were Avera's dim lens and the heavy splash of its steps. Her dreams were fragments of screams and falling metal. Whenever her body twitched, Nimri pressed himself against her in silent comfort. Eventually, they reached the tavern. Unfamiliar hands lifted Reina from Avera, carried her through hidden corridors, and placed her in a large bed beneath a tattered silk sheet. For the first time since her death, genuine sleep found her. Days and nights passed without meaning. Visitors approached the doorway to ask whether she had awakened, while one silent figure remained near her bed. Eventually, Reina opened her eyes. A weary breath became a groan as pain returned. Several beings resting near the bed stirred and turned toward her. When the unfamiliar room came into focus, Reina cried out in dismay. She covered her eyes and cried that she had wanted everything to be a dream. A cat-like creature touched the bed near her leg and assured her that she was safe. Reina answered that she only wanted to wake and return home. A gravelly voice from the corner ordered everyone to give her space. All of the attendants paused and stepped away from Reina's bed. Behind them, the figure stood and awkwardly stepped forward. Reina could hear mechanical gears and metal ends whirring and clanking in the ground. The figure entered the soft light, and Reina found herself afraid. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, hooded and masked behind a weathered blue-gray faceplate. Cables ran from ports around the mouth and over his shoulders. 3 lights glowed through triangular openings above. His broad hands had 3 fingers and a thumb, and he leaned on mechanical supports. Jagged protrusions rose from his back, while double-jointed legs ended in large damaged paws. Every few moments, A tired breath escaped beneath the mask. The figure introduced himself with a simple statement. "My name is Varric." Then he added, "You are a guest in my tavern. You may rest as long as you need, Songbearer." Something moved Reina to sit up. She called for him to wait. Varric paused and looked over his shoulder. Reina asked whether he was the one who had rescued them, and thanked him. Varric gave most of the credit to Avera, saying he had only piloted, but accepted her gratitude before limping from the room. Before Reina could add anything else, her fuzzy companion burst into the room. As Varric took his leave, he leapt onto the bed and celebrated Reina's awakening. Its short, puffy tail wagged behind it as it sat at her feet. Reina whispered the name Puff with genuine relief. Nimri assured her that he was there and admitted that everyone had feared she might never wake. When she asked how long she had slept, he answered that nearly 2 days had passed. The answer overwhelmed her. Reina tried to explain that she had died in her own world, awakened here, and still understood nothing about where she was. Once again, she begged to go home. Seeing Puff brought Reina a small measure of relief. Apart from Varric, he was the only familiar presence in the chaos surrounding her. As she wept, the other beings murmured nervously among themselves. Scaled hands covered fanged mouths, and smoky tendrils leaned toward living stones. Finally, one of them hesitantly asked whether Reina had come from another realm. Everyone leaned forward. Nimri glanced at Reina and admitted that it appeared to be true. All of the guests gasped in excitement. Reina noticed and looked up as she wiped her eyes. Reina said that she came from Kiora, Hinomori, and believed this world was not her own. A long-snouted creature with amber eyes called her a Veilborn, and marveled that none had appeared for decades. Reina asked what that meant. Nimri explained, "Vaeloria is surrounded by the Outer Veil, the mystery beyond this world. It once gave life to magic and color. On rare occasions, people from other realms are carried here. We call them Veilborn." For the first time, hope flickered in Reina. She asked whether others like her still existed. This sparked the tiniest bit of positivity in her mind. Maybe she wasn't the only one like this. Maybe there were answers. Perhaps she could be sent home. Puff's paws dashed that positivity away in an instant. Nimri continued, "Many Veilborn have been recorded, and others may have lived or died unknown. But I know of none alive today. Perhaps only 1 or 2 appear in an entire generation." Reina sighed. Still, the fact that her situation was not absolutely unheard of gave her some peace. With that, she calmed her heart with slow breaths before formally sitting up and facing her attendees. Only then did she realize how strange the scene must have looked. She lay in an enormous bed beneath a plain sheet, still wearing her torn purple stage costume, while fantastical beings gathered among ancient mechanisms, hanging banners, and glowing stone. She asked where they had brought her. The amber-eyed creature explained that they were in the Deepways, inside Varric's tavern. Another visitor asked whether Reina had truly been a songbearer in her world. Reina nodded with a sad smile. Reina said that Nimri had told her music was forbidden. One of the visitors corrected her. Music was not merely banned, it was destroyed. Every songbearer was hunted, murdered, or stripped of her song. That is how the hush made the world muted and grey. Reina could offer only a quiet apology. Then, a small creature asked whether she would sing for them. Every face leaned toward her with hope. For the first time in her memory, Reina felt no desire to sing. Music no longer brought joy, it opened only the wounds of her old life. The hush did not need to steal her song, life had already done so. Reina could only shake her head in soft disagreement. The creatures and beings all sighed in somber acceptance. With a small bow, Reina said, "I am sorry, I truly am. I do not think I can sing right now." After a brief silence, Nimri patted Reina's leg and told the room, "She has endured more than we can imagine. We should not ask for something so grand before she has had time to rest." The others all agreed, and the energy in the room dissipated. With that, it was quietly decided that Reina should rest more. One by one, the attendees left her room, including Puff. Soon, Reina was alone once more. Rest was all she could aspire to at that point, so she resigned herself to sleep until her mind could tolerate waking. Thus, the following days were spent in a state of only slight presence. as memories and nightmares blended in a chaotic symphony of dreams. Some nights, Reina woke and sensed someone watching from the corner. She could make out only a shadow leaning against the wall. Yet the presence did not frighten her. She steadied her breathing and silently thanked the unseen guardian for staying close enough to make her feel safe. Only once did she see a sign that gave her a hint of who it was. One night, as she tossed and turned between horrifying nightmares of being crushed beneath towers of metal, she opened her eyes for respite. There in the darkness, 3 triangulated eyes dimly glowed from behind an opaque mask. They looked at her intently before slowly turning away. She whispered Varric's name and pulled the blanket over her shoulder. Sleep came often, but true rest remained absent. Each time she awakened, she hoped to see Kiora. When Varric's room appeared instead, that hope sometimes twisted into a wish not to wake at all. Death felt easier than accepting this new reality. She mourned the life she had lost, and the dreams she had never achieved. She grieved for the few people she had cherished, the unresolved wounds with her family, and the career that had ended beneath collapsing metal. Grief settled over nearly every waking moment. After a week in this world, denial finally began to give way. No matter how desperately she wished otherwise, she was not going to wake in Kiora. As she lay in bed and let the grief and acceptance enfold her, she would occasionally feel the soft fur of Puff beside her. His name was Nimri. It took a few days, but she did eventually remember that. Feeling his fur rise and fall as he slept in a ball beside her did manage to give her a bit of peace. Still, between Varric's silent watching from the shadows and Nimri's quiet slumber at her side, Reina found herself wondering if she was being guarded or watched. She hoped it was guarded. Strange as the tavern and its inhabitants were, Reina did not feel endangered among them. The open world and the agents of the Hush terrified her. Inside Varric's refuge, she believed she was safe. Perhaps that was the other reason her body was forcing her to rest. Her bed was moderately comfortable. Strange yet nourishing food was brought to her twice a day along with drinks, and she had privacy when needed. In the absence of anything needed of her, perhaps her body was finally accepting that it could take a few days off after years of struggle. So she rested until rest itself became painful. Reina slept and slept until it finally began to feel unpleasant. Nearly 2 weeks after arriving in the safe house, Reina's throbbing knee pain had reached a level that made it impossible to lay still for any longer. The stone giant's casual squeeze had damaged something in the joint that was not healing. As Reina sat up and dared to finally leave her bed, she felt a flutter of nervous curiosity. This room had thus far been the only aspect of Varric's safe house that Reina had seen. Now, as bare feet stepped forward on cold stone, Reina was ready to see what was beyond her walls. Pulling aside, the heavy curtain revealed a dim, empty hallway. Reina had no way of knowing what time of day or night it was, but she wondered if the rest of the world was asleep. That possibility made it easier to move quietly. She limped toward a wide circular doorway and entered a cavernous room illuminated by pulses of muted neon light. Curved counters, hanging vessels, and tiers of seating made it resemble a pub. Snaking cables hung from the ceiling, drifting between strange banners like arteries. They fed their way up to enormous tanks that hung from the ceiling's scaffolding. Walls of signage and vials and pumps told Reina that this was the tavern space. As Reina limped through the space, she noticed a single open door along the back of the tavern wall. Upon getting closer to the opening, Reina felt a slight breeze against her ankles. She wanted to call out if anyone was there, but her raw throat kept her from speaking at any audible volume. Beyond the whispers of a draft grazing along her legs, Reina felt as though she heard something else in the near darkness that awaited beyond the door. Though it was hard to see, faint glows of ambient light told Reina that she had stepped outside. Even though they were subterranean, she could feel natural moisture in the air and scents of moss on stone. Metal steps led down from the building and further into the darkness. Now Reina could fully hear the waterfall. That was the other sound. Faint flickers of cascading water were visible as the flow caught stray beams of light. It was a small waterfall, but Reina could feel its cool even from several meters away. It was still quite dark, so Reina did not notice the clothing, mask, or 2 strange walking sticks that were on a nearby rock. She mistakenly thought she was alone until the waterfall's pool began to ripple. A figure rose from the water with its back toward her. The waterfall concealed the sound of her approach. Its body was lean, angular, scarred, and unlike any anatomy she knew, with bony protrusions rising along the joints. Varric would not have realized she was there if Reina had not cried out in shock. Varric flinched in surprise and immediately held his arms and hands to shield his unseen face. He apologized and asked her to look away. Reina turned and hurried toward the steps. Her injured knee gave way on the damp stone, and she fell with a cry of pain. Panic returned in an instant. The cavern, the stranger, and the world itself felt impossibly wrong. She apologized and said she should never have come there. Behind her, Varric climbed from the pool and hurriedly dried himself. Between strained breaths, he asked whether she was hurt. Reina explained that her old knee injury had been damaged again and had never improved. There was a clicking noise as Varric returned the mask to its place over his face. He apologized for frightening her and for allowing her to see him without it. Reina misunderstood in the moment and thought he was speaking of modesty. She shook her head and grimaced as she tried to stand. Varric extended a large, gloved hand and offered to help. Reina hesitated beneath his towering silhouette. In the low light, she could see only the glow of his eyes, yet he still felt safer than anything else in this world. When she accepted his hand, a quiet calm moved through her. Varric escorted her back to the tavern without another word. On the steep climb, Reina saw how difficult every step was for him. He leaned on complex mechanical supports, his gait uneven and his breathing heavy beneath the mask, yet he moved as though the pain were long familiar. Reina could not tell if he was angry with her for leaving her room or was simply being silent. After a moment, he finally spoke. After a long silence, Varric murmured, "I am glad to see you awake and moving." Despite his size and rough voice, there was something anxious in the way he spoke, as though private conversation itself were unfamiliar. Still, she was surprised and relieved by his comment. When Reina asked whether he was angry that she had left her room, Varric replied, "Why would I be? You are not my prisoner." They entered the tavern again. Now Reina could see the curved booths arranged around the walls at different heights, some hidden behind curtains. The center of the room lay lower than the outer tiers, giving the whole space the shape of an amphitheater. Varric moved behind the counter and awkwardly offered water or any other drink she might need. Reina's curiosity won, and she couldn't help but be tempted by whatever potential concoctions awaited her in this world. With a small smile, Reina asked what kinds of drinks he served. Varric said, "It has been a long time since I served a Solan, but I have a few drinks suited to your constitution. Do not touch the green one. It will melt your organs." Reina limped toward the bar to join him. Stray flashes of pain in her knee caused her to grimace as she walked, and it was enough for him to notice. He asked whether she was all right. She explained that the hush had worsened an old injury, that placing weight on the knee remained difficult. While she spoke, Varric poured a glowing pink drink into 2 shells. He kept one and offered the other to her. His eyes shone through the darkness like lamps in fog, and although she could not see exactly where he looked, she felt his attention remain on her. Varric said he could build something to support the leg while it healed. His offer touched Reina. Metal tapped against metal, as Varric signaled to his own knee brace with one of his crutches. He explained that he had built the devices for himself and believed he could adapt the design to her smaller body. Reina protested that she had no money to pay him. Varric answered, "I do not expect payment, Songbearer. I simply wish for you to mend." He raised his shell in a quiet toast. "Until the music returns." Reina repeated the unfamiliar blessing. She raised the smooth shell to her lips. The pink liquid was cool, bitter, and earthy, with a soft floral taste. Varric turned away from her and lifted his mask slightly to allow his mouth to meet the shell out of Reina's view. He downed the drink in one gulp before wiping his mouth and lowering his mask once more. A gentle warmth spread through Reina's body, loosening the tension in her shoulders. The bitter, floral drink tasted as though someone had distilled a flower into liquid. She thanked him and said the drink was pleasant. Varric bowed very slightly as he set his shell on the bar top. Curious about his machines, Reina asked whether he was an inventor. Varric gave a tired, humorless chuckle. He called himself a contraptionist at best. In the wastes, he had learned to build whatever he needed because the alternative was death. Reina wasn't sure what else to say. She finally accepted his offer and admitted that a brace would help greatly. Varric promised to begin the next day and asked where she planned to relocate so he could deliver it. The questions startled her. Reina had nowhere else to go, but she immediately feared that she had become a burden and was no longer welcome. With a somber bow, she said she would leave at once if that was what he wanted, and thanked him for everything he had already done. Varric stared at her in confusion. "I do not want you to leave. I assumed you would prefer somewhere more comfortable and respectable than this place. This is not a tavern of noble reputation, and I am." He stopped before finishing. Reina drank again and let the soft pink light calm her. At the center of the strange tavern stood Varric, a shadowed figure filled with things he seemed unable to say. Reina told him that she liked the tavern regardless of what anyone else thought. He had treated her with kindness and saved both her and Nimri. Without him, she likely would have died a second time. Familiar stings of exhaustion and confusion burned her eyes as she struggled to process everything once more. Varric laughed softly and observed that she truly could not be from Vaeloria. Then he said, "No one born in this realm would willingly stay in a tavern owned by a Karun. I am honored to host you, Songbearer. You may remain as long as you wish." His voice was rough, yet Reina felt drawn to it. Each sentence seemed to conceal layers he would not reveal. She did not understand why others rejected him, but she no longer cared. The last of the pink drink soothed the ragged edges of her mind. Vaeloria remained terrifying and unknown. For the moment, the tavern and its mysterious owner gave her a place where she could breathe. She did not want to die or disappear. She wanted to return home. Yet every new sensation and memory made her fear that this place had already become her only home. At least, she had her own room. Now, she just needed to rest and find something to keep her occupied. Reina told Varric she wanted to be useful while she stayed. She asked whether there was any work she could do in the tavern. Freedom had become unfamiliar to her. Although she had possessed ordinary civil rights in Hinamori, her career had turned her into both a person and a product. The agency planned her days, chose her clothes, supplied her songs, and shaped every public detail. Her role was to combine those decisions into a marketable personality. So, when she asked to help in Varric's tavern, she expected the request to be denied immediately. To her surprise, Varric accepted after a brief pause of confusion. He asked whether tavern work was beneath someone like her. It was a strange question for Reina. There was nothing about his work, tavern, or environment that felt beneath her. After reaching an agreement with Varric, Reina decided it was best to tell Nimri. The Ember Accord and its war were still far beyond Reina's understanding. Even so, she felt Nimri deserved to know about her decision. His presence had been comforting for her in the weeks since arriving, and he was a gentle spirit. Though she could not understand what the subtle friction was between Nimri and Varric, she trusted them both and wanted to do what was right by them. When Reina told Nimri that she intended to stay and work at the tavern, his 4 eyes blinked at different intervals and drifted in separate directions. Nimri began to object, then checked himself. "You are your own person, and autonomy matters above all else. If this is your choice, I will support it. Perhaps I will remain while I reconnect with the Conclave." Reina asked what conclave he meant. Nimri explained that the conclave led the Ember Accord. Its members were scattered through the deepways to avoid the Hush's spies, and he himself held a seat among them. Reina smiled and asked why he had never mentioned being important. Nimri dismissed the title, calling himself little more than a messenger, though he admitted the position was real. He never openly criticized her choice. Instead, he spoke privately with Varric. Reina could not read Varric's masked face, but she noticed tension gather in his hands while Nimri spoke. Regardless, from that day forward, Nimri stayed in the tavern sanctum as well, sleeping in the small cupboard across the hall from Reina. He and Varric were polite enough to one another, even eventually exchanging pleasantries. But Varric remained the stoic, aloof, mysterious being that drifted in the shadows. Indeed, it took a few days for Reina to even manage to corner him. and ask him outright how she could help. Nimri was with her when it occurred. To her surprise, Varric glanced down at Nimri before answering. Reina asked what the two of them were hiding. Nimri asked for discretion. "I will never try to control your choice, but you must understand how important you are. You are more precious to this world than any jewel or sacred text." For the moment, he asked her to remain out of sight, and he had urged Varric to give her work away from the public rooms. It didn't feel pressuring, or controlling, or restrictive. It felt cautious. And Reina could tolerate that. In her heart, she wasn't even sure she was ready to engage with the vast scope of unfamiliar species that constantly snuck through the darkened halls of the tavern. Varric agreed with the warning. The Hush has spies everywhere, and its enforcers visit from time to time. An unfamiliar she-Solan will draw attention, especially once rumors of a Songbearer begin to spread. Reina asked whether she was truly that important. Suddenly, she felt guilty for not wanting to do anything beyond help in the tavern. Music and singing were still painful, distant memories for her. Her voice was gone for the time being. Varric told her, "You are important, but I will not ask you to hide in a vault for the rest of your life. Neither will Nimri." Nimri immediately agreed. Varric reached under the counter and retrieved 3 small bands that held circular dials with floating gears that softly clicked in their casings. He had made one for each of them. If his band sent an alert, Reina was to hide immediately. Nimri would wear one as well, because his position on the conclave made him a target. Nimri praised the idea and examined the mechanism. Reina admired it too. The device was light yet intricate, and Varric had sized each band and dial for its wearer. She fastened her own, then helped Nimri because he had no thumbs. When Nimri's band was fastened, he held it up in approval for Varric, who nodded and pressed the dial on his. Reina immediately felt the buzz shake her wrist with a soft alert. Reina and Nimri announced together that it worked. Varric gave a satisfied nod. Varric assigned her the work directly. "Help me manage inventory. You will not lift anything heavy. Track the stock, prepare requests, and tell me if another task interests you. As long as it keeps you away from the front room, I will support you." Nimri promised the same support. And so Reina accepted her first job since becoming an idol. She clapped once and let out a small, unguarded squeal. She paused to appreciate the feeling. It was the first uncomplicated joy she had experienced since awakening in Vaeloria. Nimri laughed until his tail struck the chair, while Varric quietly returned to work. Her career as an idol had ended. In this new life, Reina had become a barback. The following days passed quickly. Measuring supplies, cleaning storage rooms, and recording inventory gave Reina peace through distraction. The war-ravaged surface felt distant, even though she knew it still existed beyond the walls. Time with Nimri, and occasional conversation with Varric, softened her anxiety. Dread still returned without warning, forcing her to pause and steady herself before grief could overwhelm her again. Every morning remained strange. She still opened her eyes hoping to see Kiora. At darker moments, she hoped not to wake at all. Instead, the same stone room, glowing energy, hanging banners, and unreadable documents waited for her. Yet, the tavern became familiar. One day, while Reina measured the reserve tanks of a bubbling liquid favored by larger patrons, Varric's mechanical supports tapped along the corridor behind her. Varric entered carrying a small metal device fitted with thick fabric straps. He announced that it was finished. Reina immediately realized he had completed her brace. Her leg pain had never gone away. The throbbing eased when she sat still, but walking, squatting, or climbing brought the pain back at least once a day. Reina lifted the device from Varric's gloved hand and observed the intricate parts that created the hinges and joint support. Amazed by the design, she asked how he had understood the way her knee moved. With a trace of embarrassment, Varric admitted that he had watched the way she moved. Reina felt a small flutter in her chest that left her utterly perplexed, but she did now remember occasionally seeing his glowing eyes focused on her throughout the days. Now she knew why. She thanked him warmly and sat on the floor to fit the device. Only then did she recognize how absurd her appearance had become. Weeks after her death, she still wore the torn, frilled, stage costume. The corset was gone, but the remaining top stayed tightly stitched around her waist and chest. Varric noticed her hesitation. He asked whether something was wrong with the brace. Reina assured him the device was fine, then admitted that she could no longer bear the old costume and wanted different clothes. The bands fit almost perfectly around her thigh, and small ratchets allowed precise adjustment. Varric had measured her remarkably well. The realization that he had studied her movements so closely warmed her cheeks, and she shook her head to refocus. Varric explained that one section would prevent lateral movement, while the springs would help her rise from sitting or kneeling. A central latch locked or released the mechanism. Once Reina was done, she pressed onto the ground and forced herself up with a grunt. The pain shot into her cartilage instantly, causing her to grimace. Reina knew this device would not be a miracle fix, but she was thrilled that it would help relieve the strain and keep everything from becoming worse. Before she could formally thank her device's creator, he was already gone. By the time she stood up from the ground, Varric was already walking out the door. She called after him and repeated her gratitude. He turned slightly but did not face her all the way. Varric said he would ask Nimri to accompany them to the Gloam Lanes in search of new clothes. Reina was left alone in the pink-lit hallway, admiring the device that was now helping remove the strain of standing. A final flush of embarrassment crossed her face when the brace shifted against the bare skin of her thigh. The next day, it was time to leave the tavern. Nimri arrived at Reina's room door covered in an adorable fuchsia cloak. Reina called him dashing while securing her brace. Nimri proudly explained that the cloak had been made for a grand ball long ago. She asked whether he danced. He said he loved dancing, though a world without music gave him little opportunity. Perhaps, he hoped, he would dance again one day. Reina was unsure how to respond. All she could do was return his smile. She repeated that perhaps the day would come. When they arrived in the tavern hall, Varric was waiting. He was holding a tattered cloak, which he handed to Reina without a word. Reina accepted the cloak with a quiet word of thanks. Varric explained, "I am coming with you. If anyone asks, you work for me, and we are searching for new offerings and decor for the obsidian hearth." Reina raised an eyebrow in confusion. Varric asked what was wrong. She suddenly realized that no one had ever told her the tavern's name. Varric confirmed it. Apparently puzzled by her reaction, Reina laughed and declared that the obsidian hearth was an extraordinarily good name. Nimri agreed. Varric accepted the praise with visible uncertainty, while Reina pulled the cloak over her costume and lowered the hood. Before opening the door, he asked whether both companions were wearing their alert bands. Both Reina and Nimri held up their wrists in unison to reveal the devices in place. Varric nodded and held up his own wrist in confirmation before unlatching the enormous lock on the heavy metal door. For the first time, Reina stepped beyond the obsidian hearth and into the hidden world of the deepways. The tavern stood at the bottom of a steep winding lane. Shops and homes had been carved directly into the rock, while newer shanties were stacked above them like unstable blocks. Tapestries and glowing cables stretched across the passage. The light was weak and strangely colorless. Reina had assumed the tavern's muted atmosphere was a matter of design, but now she wondered whether the hush had drained the entire realm. Walking was slow between Varric's crutches, Nimri's tiny legs, and Reina's wound. Still, up they went. Nimri's body was barely larger than each step, and Reina couldn't help but enjoy the cuteness of watching him flip himself up every individual rise, with a slight squeak. Still, she felt bad for the effort. She offered to carry him. Nimri accepted with immediate relief. Reina joked that Avera would have made the climb easier and checked that she remembered the machine's name correctly. Varric confirmed that she had. When he referred to Avera as female, Reina asked whether the machine was alive. Varric chuckled once more. Varric explained, "Avera is not alive. I repaired her many years ago, and she has saved me more times than I can count. It did not feel right to treat something so wondrous as a nameless device." Every answer revealed another layer of him. Reina still could not reconcile the contradictions in Varric. He distrusted the Ember Accord, yet risked his life to save its members. He hid in a tavern while opening his doors to the desperate, and wherever he went, he inspired both respect and suspicion. She told Varric that he was an interesting person and asked him to thank Avera for saving their lives. He lowered his head paused, and nodded. By now, they had reached the top of the stairs, and an even more fascinating sight met Reina. Looking up, Reina could not contain a gasp of wonder. They stood at the base of a vast multi-story atrium. Hive-like shops covered the floor, walls, and ceiling, with hundreds of suspended structures glowing like lanterns. Bridges of luminous rope wound between the levels. Crowds of beings moved through the market. Merchants called from storefronts. Winged creatures traveled between platforms. And bioluminescent plants grew over stone roofs. Colored fissures pulsed beneath every path. A massive waterfall divided into smaller cascades that fed pools and streams throughout the atrium. Cool air flowed with the water, and dozens of creatures drank directly from the channels. Remembering Nimri's reaction to her singing, Reina asked what word he had used. He answered, "What wonder?" Looking across the impossible marketplace, Reina repeated Nimri's phrase with genuine awe, "What wonder?" Varric welcomed her to Lantern Market. Scents of earthen spices mixed with furnace smoke and incense. Shops selling vegetables of unusual color and texture called out for customers. Enormous leaves of plants were laid out to dry as offerings for consumption. Meat was nowhere to be seen. Only vegetables, fruits, grains, and roots. Varric led them forward as Reina allowed herself to be lost in the sights, sounds, and scents. Even though everything was muted, it somehow felt pure and alive. There was a grimy desperation to the secrecy and darkness of the space, but it did not feel dangerous. Reina did notice a handful of intrigued glances shot in her direction, so she pulled her hood close, but did not become afraid. Beside them, an enormous, leathery creature leaned forward. Its eyes were at the ends of two separate trunks, and they moved separately from one another as it observed Varric and his followers. Then one eye settled on Reina and Nimri. The merchant recognized him and called out in surprise. Nimri greeted the creature as Taloven, and marveled that it had opened a shop in the market. Varric paused and waited. The creature named Taloven returned the bow. Taloven explained that the hush had burned its former town. Then it noticed the dust on Nimri's cloak and scolded him for neglecting such fine work. Nimri promised to care for the garment properly and blamed the long neglect on years of crisis. Taloven's wandering eyes turned toward Reina. She tensed as its many tentacles carried the enormous body closer, while Varric's hands tightened around his supports. The tailor said the rumors were apparently true. A she-Solan who had once been a Songbearer had appeared. Varric denied knowing what it meant. He identified Reina only as a refugee hired to help at the obsidian hearth. Taloven smiled in understanding and laughed to itself. It accepted the explanation with exaggerated innocence and promised to visit the tavern soon so it could speak with Varric's new helper. Before turning away, one tentacle wrapped gently around Reina's hand. The touch was so careful, and the tears in Taloven's eyes so unmistakable, that Reina called it back. All of them turned to face Reina. Reina explained that she needed a new wardrobe and asked whether Taloven could make clothing suitable for a she-Solan. Taloven released a cry of gratitude so loud that several shoppers stopped. Nimri laughed and urged the tailor to control itself. Taloven shouted that the helper had chosen to enter its humble shop and called the moment a wonder. Varric exhaled and pushed his mask back in place. He suggested that Reina should take the reaction as a yes. Multiple tentacles burst forward to throw the curtains of the shop aside, revealing a packed workroom full of fabrics and decorations. It declared that fitting Reina would be an honor and led the group inside. The selection overwhelmed her. She had expected simple gray tunics, but the shop blazed with ornate patterns, vivid color, and hundreds of pieces made for individual expression. Reina admitted she hardly knew where to begin as Nimri settled onto a cushion. Nimri proudly explained that Taloven had once served the most prestigious district of the Crown Tiers. Taloven corrected him. It was still a fine tailor, merely one that now worked in the slums. It added a quick apology to Varric. Varric took no offense, though he rubbed his chest as if easing an old pain. Taloven offered him a large three-legged chair. Varric accepted and sat down, all the while keeping his gaze on the world outside. He told Reina to take her time while he watched for danger. She thanked him. Taloven searched for garments that could be altered to her build, comparing her proportions to the Valari and Quarathi, before matter-of-factly observing that her chest was fuller. Behind them, Varric coughed and cleared his throat. Reina blushed and tried not to laugh. Tentacles surrounded her in waiting. Taloven asked permission to remove her cloak and take measurements. Reina agreed and raised her arms. Fabric slid over her shoulders and head, and she was left in her costume. Taloven found the clothing fascinating. Reina almost said that it belonged to her work as a singer, then corrected herself and called it part of her old work as a helper. Taloven smiled, as though it understood the deception, and began measuring. Lengths of string crossed Reina's shoulders, chest, waist, hips, knees, and thighs. Other tentacles wrote notes and sorted through fabrics at the same time. Taloven told her, "Clothing is sacred expression, especially in darkness. To keep your color and identity when the hush wants everything muted is a form of rebellion. So tell me, what color feels most true to you?" The freedom to choose stirred unexpected excitement. In her old life, every outfit had been selected by someone else. Now, one color rose immediately in her mind. The vivid purple glow that had greeted her in the Echo Sanctum. She chose bright purple. Nimri applauded the decision. Taloven smiled and bowed. It then asked whether the knee brace had to remain part of her clothing. Reina said the support was necessary and asked for an outfit designed around it. She also requested freedom around her chest because she never wanted to wear another corset. Taloven promised that her comfort would guide every choice. It asked for 1 hour to create options that would feel both familiar and entirely new. It bowed and slid away into the back rooms of its shop. Reina had absolute faith that whatever it returned with, she would be thrilled. Time passed without much conversation. Reina enjoyed simply sitting in place and listening to the noise just beyond the store. Strange, unfamiliar sounds and scents drifted through the thin walls. After a moment, she asked to walk around a little more to see the rest of the main atrium. Varric agreed and joined her. They walked between the stalls in silence. At the center floated a vast sphere made from dozens of turning rings, each inscribed with symbols from different languages. Lights at its base illuminated the structure with solemn care. Reina asked what it represented. Varric answered, "Those rings carry the names of families erased by the hush. When no one remains to speak a name, it is placed here so the family will still be remembered." Reina wondered whether Varric's family appeared there, but his posture warned her not to ask. Near the waterfalls, a communal kitchen had been assembled from makeshift tables. Dozens of volunteers served food to more than 100 residents, including several small, childlike creatures. Several of them saw Varric and bowed. Reina observed that the people respected him. Varric dismissed the idea. He only helped gather food, he said, so that no one in the market would go hungry. Reina told him that kindness was obvious in his actions and thanked him again for everything he had done. Varric said he would have helped anyone, accepted her gratitude, and turned back toward the shop. With nothing more to add, Reina followed him back to Taloven's shop. Taloven was waiting when they returned. Nimri grinned as a dozen finished garments hung from the tailor's tentacles, each decorated with intricate accessories, luminous ribbon, and fine detail. The amount of work exceeded anything Reina had imagined. She rushed forward, amazed that so much had been created so quickly. Nimri called Taloven the finest tailor in the Crown Tiers. Reina corrected him with delighted emphasis, the finest tailor in the entire Deepways. Then she hugged Taloven. Regret was nearly immediate, as another bellowing wail escaped the creature. Taloven declared that the helper had embraced it and vowed never to bathe again. Laughing through her own sudden tears, Reina begged the tailor to continue bathing and assured it that she was simply grateful. Once Taloven calmed, it explained how to care for every garment. They agreed that Reina would change at the obsidian hearth to avoid attracting attention. After more instructions and several more tears, the tailor offered a final bow. Taloven said, "I do not know why you came here or what anyone may expect of you, but I will cherish this day for the rest of my life. I hope you will return to the hearth and that I may see you again." The words nearly overwhelmed Reina. She did not know why she was there either, nor what comfort she could offer, a world ruled by cruelty. In Hinamori, she had considered herself a failure. Here, every being who learned of her voice, treated her like a source of hope. For the moment, she focused on the simpler joy of leaving her ruined costume behind. The trio left Lantern Market and followed the winding path back through the darkness. As the obsidian hearth came into view, Reina finally saw its exterior clearly enough to understand the name. The obsidian hearth had been built inside a colossal hexagonal shard of obsidian driven into the ground at an angle. A deep fracture split its center, and the doorway had been carved into that break. Crates crowded the walls, bright lamps hung beneath the ledge, and moss and vines crossed the glowing veins of the stone. A small crooked sign rested above the entrance. Absorbed by the sight, Reina failed to notice the cloaked figures waiting nearby. Nimri recognized the visitors as members of the conclave and immediately swore that he had not contacted them. Reina's heart raced in fear that it was the Hush, but Varek, and even Nimri, seemed more annoyed and concerned than frightened. Their steps did not cease, and soon Varek was upon the 5 cloaked guests. He asked Vaudrin what unfortunate reason had brought him there. A figure that was almost as tall as Varek, but much broader, stepped forward and lowered its hood. Doing so revealed the features of a grizzled, intimidating tusked being with tired eyes and a grey beard. Vaudrin answered that they had not come for Varek, then stepped toward Reina. Now the dread returned for Reina as the being's silver eyes settled on her. Vaudrin said rumors had spread through the Ember Accord for more than a week, yet its own messenger had reported nothing. When the conclave searched for Nimri, they found him beside the very person at the center of those rumors. The other conclave delegates stepped closer, but Vaudrin's silver eyes never left Reina. Vaudrin introduced himself. "My name is Vaudrin. It is an honor to meet you, Songbearer. The Ember Accord wishes to speak with you." Inside the tavern, Varek sealed the metal door behind them. 5 members of the Ember Accord's ruling conclave now stood before Reina, with Vaudrin clearly leading the delegation. His presence carried the weight of years of conflict. Each step drew a low growl from his chest, and chipped fangs framed tusks larger than Reina's hands. Varek limped past the group and sat in his chair for rest. Vaudrin huffed in quiet judgment. He demanded privacy. Varek's blank mask tilted with an annoyance that Reina could sense, even in the absence of visible expressions. He reminded Vaudrin that the obsidian hearth belonged to him. Vaudrin answered that Varek was not a member of the Ember Accord, and therefore had no place in Accord business. Varek's voice sharpened. "The fact that I am still alive proves the wisdom of avoiding your death wish. How many did you lead to slaughter in that battle, Vaudrin?" Vaudrin warned Varek not to test and under his patience. Varek couldn't help himself. He added, "At this point, being your enemy appears safer than being your ally." Nimri silenced them both with a roar. The force of his voice shook Reina's ribs. Vaudrin and Varek stopped, and Nimri's authority became impossible to dismiss. Vaudrin turned his anger toward the tavern itself, accusing Varek of hiding the first Songbearer in a century inside a degrading house of intoxication. Before fear could stop her, Reina said she was not being held there. The words were barely louder than a whisper, and she regretted them as soon as they escaped. Yet, every face turned toward her, and the 4 conclave delegates behind Vaudrin bowed. She forced herself to continue. "I am not a captive. I asked to stay and help here. Varek saved Nimri and me. Without him, I would be dead. Please do not make assumptions about me at his expense." None of them spoke. Reina added that she genuinely liked being there. One conclave delegate offered to bring her to the Ember Accord's stronghold, where she could be guarded and live in greater comfort. Varek warned that comfort would come with endless discussion about how to use her. No conclave delegate could deny it. Reina knew the feeling of being treated as a resource rather than a person, and the proposal carried the same familiar pressure. Reina shook her head. "Nimri told me that autonomy matters above all else. I want to stay here with Varek and Nimri. Thank you, but I must decline." Vaudrin let out a slight roar as he spoke. He called the choice foolish. Reina was a Veilborn unfamiliar with their world and too young to understand her importance. He refused to accept leaving her unguarded in the slums. She stepped forward and answered, "I am not a child. I know struggle, hardship, and loss. I may not understand your war, my power, or why I am here, but I know what feels right. What feels right is staying here. Her own firmness surprised her. For years, she had swallowed every objection. Now she had died, been imprisoned, and endured torture. She was still afraid, but she refused to let that fear silence her. Vaudren stepped toward her, his silver eyes shining with a frightening red cast. Vaudren leaned close and said, "Before the Hush slaughtered them, Songbearers were the sacred priestesses of this world. Their music brought healing and peace to nations. If you insist on hiding in a tavern, then you are no Songbearer. You are only a girl who can sing." The judgment cut directly into her oldest wound. Vaudren knew nothing of Hinamori, yet his words echoed the belief Reina had carried for years, that she had never become more than a girl who sang. Realizing that Reina would not yield, Vaudren turned his frustration toward Nimri. He questioned Nimri's commitment and placed Reina's safety in his hands, warning that history would curse him if any harm came to her. Nimri inhaled and nodded. Nimri told Vaudren, "For all our plans, theories, and strategies, we are still losing." Then he continued, "A Veilborn Songbearer appeared beyond anything we predicted. Perhaps it is time for us to become flexible. On my life, I will not allow harm to befall her." Reina felt his small paw touch her hand with a slight tremble. Varric gave the same promise. The rest of the conclave delegates bowed, but Vaudren could not fully accept. Even in defeat, he had to keep challenging. He sneered that they would soon learn the value of a Karun's word. Another conclave delegate sharply ordered him to stop. Reina did not understand the insult, though she recognized its cruelty. Varric gave no visible reaction. As the delegation turned toward the door, she called after them, "Reina." They looked back. Her heart struck against her ribs and her hands felt cold, but she held her ground. Reina held their attention and said, "My name is Reina. I may never become the Songbearer you want, and I may not know what I am doing, but I am a person. My name is Reina." Vaudren made a dismissive sound and left without answering. Once the door sealed behind the conclave, Reina's control broke and tears burned down her face. Nimri corrected himself from Songbearer to Reina and touched her hand. She cried that she understood none of what was happening. Why did the Hush want her? Why did the Ember Accord want her? Why had Taloven wept? Simply because she entered the shop. Why had she been brought to this world? The questions were not new, but no answer had emerged. Her entire existence now seemed tied to being a mystical singer, yet her voice felt hollow. What good was a songbearer in this world if she had no song? The wonder of Lantern Market vanished beneath that grief. Reina returned to her room and cried herself to sleep. When she woke, Nimri was curled at the foot of the bed. Her eyes still burned from crying. The weight of everything pressed down again. Vaudren's words had broken through what little confidence she had rebuilt. Quiet sniffles filled the muted room until Nimri's ear twitched. Nimri whispered, "Let it out, child. Do not fight it. Grief becomes easier to carry once you allow it to move." Reina admitted that she had never felt so lost. Nimri said he would have been worried if she felt anything else. A Solan who died in another realm and awakened in the middle of their war had every reason to be overwhelmed. Reina asked whether he hated her. The fear was sincere. Vaudren had described a legacy she could not imagine fulfilling. By hiding in the obsidian hearth without a song, Reina worried that she insulted everyone who had died for music. She could have understood if Nimri or Varric judged her. Nimri turned and faced her. Pale light reflected on his 4 opaque eyes, casting a somber glow across his features. Nimri promised, "I could never hate you. Whatever hatred remains in me belongs to the Hush and what it stole from all of us. Do not judge Vaudren too harshly. He was only a boy when the old world fell, and life made him hard." Reina tried to joke that this might explain why the two men disliked each other so much. Nimri admitted that their similarities certainly did not help. From the hallway, Varric remarked that he could hear them. Nimri jumped in surprise. The door opened slightly, revealing a narrow glimpse of Varric's mask. Reina could not see an expression, but sensed amusement. Varric said his contempt for Vaudren went well beyond shared tragedy. He considered Vaudren a fool who would destroy the Ember Accord, though he admitted that their similar need for validation made every disagreement worse. There was a pause. Nimri made a bemused expression and winked at Reina. Reina sat upright and noticed that she still wore the old costume. Taloven's new clothing hung from a rod nearby, its delicate neon threads pulsing in the dark. Looking at them, Reina's mind went to Taloven's gentle acknowledgement and the tears in its eyes. Reina asked whether she was truly so important and whether she might actually be the last Songbearer. Nimri inhaled and sighed, then nodded. Nimri answered, "The Hush killed every known Songbearer. If any survived, they have been hidden or imprisoned for more than a century. As far as I know, you may truly be the last." Varric's head lowered slightly in pensive listening. Nimri's answer brought more weight to Reina's chest. She asked whether the old Songbearers had truly possessed what people from Estrella would call magic, whether they could heal others and calm entire societies. Varric explained. Their healing was not as simple as regrowing a severed limb. They mended the spirit of nations, stirred emotion across multitudes, and softened hatred. That is why the Hush feared them. It was all too much. Reina's unkempt hair fell around her face as she rubbed cold fingertips together. She remembered her disappointed family, angry executives, empty venues, and every failure that had taught her to feel insufficient. Of all the people fate could have sent to this desperate world, it had chosen someone who believed she had failed at everything. Ashamed, she wondered why fate had chosen her, and silently apologized for not being the person this world seemed to need. From behind the door, Varric carefully asked why singing had become so difficult for her. Reina wiped her eyes dry and let her hands fall to her lap in weak abandon. Reina finally answered, "Life took music from me. Singing was the one thing I trusted, but following it cost me my family, my home, my independence, my hope, and my life." Her voice lowered as she admitted, "It took everything, and part of me hates it." The word frightened her because it was true. Hatred had replaced the peace she once found in music and turned inward until she despised herself as much as the career that had broken her. Through tears, Reina said, "But I do not want to hate it. I do not want to hate myself." Nimri scooted closer to her as tears welled in his own eyes. He told her that self-hatred was painfully familiar. After the fall of the old world, he wandered for decades. Having lost the person most precious to him, his work, and everything that once gave him joy, at his lowest point, he nearly surrendered. Nimri paused and wiped his eyes. Nimri looked toward the past. As he said, "At my lowest point, a silent young Karun found me. He fed me, gave me water, carried me for days to a sanctuary, and disappeared without asking for thanks." Nimri turned to look at Varric. Varric said the event belonged to another age and another version of himself. Some people, he added, never truly escaped the years of self-hatred. Reina realized that the two had known each other for far longer than she imagined, and that Varric had carried his own loathing for ages. Nimri smiled through his tears. "That kindness reminded me there was still wonder in the world. Since then, my revolution has been to preserve joy, help whoever I can, and keep searching for wonder. That path led me to you." "What wonder?" Reina cried again, this time from gratitude. Nimri's body was small, but his spirit felt immense. When she looked toward the doorway, Varric's glowing eyes were already turned toward her. She asked what the two of them believed she should do. Varric shook his head. "That decision cannot belong to anyone but you." Nimri sighed and scratched his chin beside him. Reina clarified that she was asking for guidance, not surrendering her choice. She did not understand this world and needed to know whether she should stay hidden or join the Ember Accord. Nimri warned, "Even with good intentions, the Ember Accord will eventually try to use you in war. Violence has its place, but oppressed people need more than another battlefield." A metallic pop sounded from Varric's chest as he gathered his thoughts. Varric straightened and said, "Before you choose any path, reconnect with yourself. You do not have to heal everything at once, but if you step forward on shaking legs, you will fall." Nimri praised the advice. Reina agreed. She understood that her connection to music had not vanished without reason. Death, humiliation, and trauma had severed it, and those wounds needed care. The burden was still immense. But she no longer wanted to let that burden decide everything. Looking down at the torn costume, Reina knew it was time to change. She would say farewell to the role others had designed for her. and move forward on her own terms, with her own voice. Whether she joined the Ember Accord or found another path, she already knew that she stood against everything the Hush represented. Her life in Hinamori was gone. Accepting that truth broke her heart, but it was still the truth. Hiding forever inside the tavern could not become the full measure of her new existence. She could not erase the past, but she could decide what came next. Reina called Varric's name. Her tone was resolute and calm. Varric sat upright. Nimri's ears perked. Varric answered. Reina looked toward the doorway and said, "That waterfall, may I go there? I want to wash before I try on my new clothes. And if the water is loud enough to hide my voice, I would like to try to sing."